In case you've been living under a rock, AUKUS stands for Australia, UK and US. It's our combined defence partnership, primarily focused around, in the first phase, providing submarines to Australia. And before we get to that point, when they're received in the early 2030s, we're going to have the US and UK submarines rotating in and out of Perth to establish a stronger defence. The Australian and WA governments plan to invest around $8 billion by 2033 to expand the HMAS Sterling, WA's fleet base west, and the associated infrastructure. So a lot of money getting spent. WA policymakers view AUKUS as a chance to diversify our economy beyond mining, which is going to be really great to give us a strong, stable, consistent industry that we haven't had. One of the most immediate effects of AUKUS in WA is going to be the heightened demand for housing in Perth's southern suburbs. So the influx of defence personnel, construction workers and support staff's already being felt in areas near the naval base. One of the most exciting trends shaping the Perth market right now, and that's gentrification. I'm going to unpack the top 5 suburbs that are transforming the fastest and define what gentrification really means in the property context. It's not about new housing estates popping up on the outskirts. It's about the renewal of existing suburbs. These 5 suburbs have a lot in common. They're close to the city. They've got improving infrastructure and amenities. They're seeing new cafes, better schools and fresher demographics moving in. And they have a visible building and renovation boom that's going on. And that's a physical sign of belief and investment into those locations. What if I told you Perth's biggest economic game changer isn't a new mine or a defence deal, but an airport? What's the real payoff for WA? Currently, the Perth Airport supports 27,300 jobs and contributes $6.2 billion annually to WA's economy. By 2046, those numbers are forecasted to grow to 75,400 jobs and $17 billion worth of annual contribution. Where does the Perth Airport expansion sit in the grand scheme of Australia's economic landscape and WA's economic landscape, more importantly? How I'm going into the high density planning changes that are going to reshape the areas within 800 metres of 10 train stations across Perth. I want to go into what this is going to mean for the people that own a property within that 800 metre radius. I'm going to look at how this might change the suburbs. Is it going to be a net positive overall benefit? What are some of the negatives and how is this likely to shape out? These apartments and units are going to sit in very high amenity with lots of incoming cafes and amenities and things that'll be part of the developments as well in transit-rich locations, and they'll typically still have high rental appeal for renting out and command a decent rental yield because of those factors. If you're a property owner in those areas, I'd be keeping your property. If you're looking to make a purchase, this is the type of X factor that you could also put on the top of a purchase that should see demand increase for your property over the next 5 to 10 years.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth.
Now, in case you've been living under a rock, AUKUS stands for Australia, UK and US. It's our combined defence partnership, primarily focused around, in the first phase, providing of submarines to Australia. And before we get to that point, when they're received in the early 2030s, we're going to have the US and UK submarines rotating in and out of Perth to establish a stronger defence, start training up our support crew and maintenance crew, and getting familiar with the overall platform ahead of time when we will have our own submarines provided to us. Things firmed up after looking a little shaky over the last few months with the transition to President Trump, and it's now looking like it's all going ahead. So I thought it would be an appropriate time to look at exactly what this means and what the impact's going to be. So this partnership is set to inject billions with a B into Western Australia economy over the next decade and establish a new defence industry hub in Perth's southwest. So the Australian and WA governments plan to invest around $8 billion by 2033 to expand the HMAS Sterling WA's fleet base west and the associated infrastructure. So a lot of money getting spent. How does this all sort of look? Well, the expansion is creating around 3,000 direct jobs in construction, engineering and specialised trades on that base, with hundreds more in the supply chain and support services. In addition to that, there's a $12 billion federal down payment was announced for cutting-edge naval shipbuilding precinct at Henderson. So $8 billion going into HMAS Sterling, the fleet base, a further $12 billion going into a naval shipyard precinct in Henderson, and that's expected to support a further 10,000 direct jobs over the next 20 years. So massive project for Henderson there with massive impact on jobs and our economy. Now, these include roles in building and sustaining submarines and surface vessels, reflecting a major expansion of WA's defence industrial workforce. So with a record defence spending, WA is going to definitely benefit. Its broader economy will definitely benefit. And local contractors in civil construction, logistics and high-tech manufacturing are gearing up for a solid pipeline of $2 to $3 billion per year in works over the next 10 to 15 years. So importantly, WA policymakers view AUKUS as a chance to diversify our economy beyond mining, which is going to be really great to give us a strong, stable, consistent industry that we haven't had. So WA's Premier has even hailed the new Henderson submarine precinct as a game changer that could rival the resources industry as a pillar of growth and employment. So massive. So while the scale of AUKUS is smaller than mining, so the mining industry currently employs about 135,000 people as of 2024. I mentioned above about 13,000 direct jobs coming about over the next decade. So about 10% of what's currently involved in mining is looking to be involved in the AUKUS related jobs. So the AUKUS program, while it's not on the scale of the whole mining industry, probably a bit concerning if it was to that sort of scale, 10% definitely moves the needle. And because it's a lot more stable type of spending, it's really going to stabilize the overall economy. So government officials are emphasizing that up to 70% of spending will go into sustainment and maintenance over the decades. So that's going to inject tens of billions into the WA economy and create ongoing skilled jobs in engineering and technology. So that's the encouraging part. So when it comes to the infrastructure development, that is a major component because they have to gear things up at both HMAS Sterling off Garden Island and upgrade. So they're upgrading the wharf extension. They're going to add new maintenance workshops. They're going to add training facilities. They're going to improve the power and waste management to support the nuclear-powered submarines. They're going to build a small nuclear waste facility and an uninterrupted power supply on the base to safely steward these submarines. So then, I guess, outside of the base, local infrastructure is then going to need to expand. So plans are underway for improved roads, revisiting Garden Island Highway Link, and community facilities to accommodate the growth. When we start looking at neighbouring areas and how that's going to impact them, the City of Rockingham's positioning itself as a defence-ready hub, leveraging its proximity to Sterling Naval Base and Henderson. So Sterling Naval Base will be 10 kilometres from City of Rockingham and 25 kilometres to Henderson. to attract related administration, innovation, and training centres. So they're really gearing up to try to get as much of that economic pie as possible. And in fact, the Advanced Defence and Maritime Training Centre in Rockingham has been proposed to upskill local workers and complement the federal programs to train WA's workforce. So they're going to do partnerships with TAFE and universities as well, but they're aiming to put that Advanced Defence and Maritime Training Centre in Rockingham itself. So that'll definitely add to the local area there. And overall, Perth's economy is going to be poised for a significant defence-led boost. So the AUKUS submarine program is going to be Australia's largest ever military acquisition, where they're spending up to $368 billion nationally by 2055, and Perth's going to be at the forefront of that. So very exciting for Perth. One of the most exciting trends shaping the Perth market right now, and that's gentrification. I'm going to unpack the top 5 suburbs that are transforming the fastest. And these are places where the older homes are being drastically renovated or replaced with stylish new builds, often subdivisions occurring, cafe strips are coming alive. There's a new demographic of buyers moving in that have more money to spend on their houses, more bringing a buzz to the area. I guess gentrification itself is a bit of a buzzword, isn't it? But it's a powerful investment signal for those of us that want a bit of an X factor that's going to drive growth beyond what the trend in the past has been. So it's when a suburb goes from being overlooked, I guess, by a lot of buyers to undervalued and being rediscovered by the young professionals, families and developers who start to see its potential, and that increasing demand leads to above average price growth over the medium term. So certainly not the only factor that you should consider. And when we look at analysing where to invest with our trifecta review, it's not the primary thing that we base our selection on. It's more of an X factor that we put on the top. And if you've got 2 suburbs side by side, they both really check out strongly with our trifecta review, but one of them has an X factor, like the Orcas project down south, which I covered last week, that are going to affect those south coastal suburbs. Another one here is if it has the gentrification going on, which I'm covering this week, then that's going to sort of really be a bonus to drive demand over that medium to long term. So if you can get into these areas early enough before everyone else catches on, you can ride that next wave of capital growth, and it's going to be very interesting to unpack this. So grab a coffee. This one's going to give you some real on-the-ground insights. So what is gentrification? I touched on it a little bit there. But before we get into the suburbs themselves, let's just take a step back and define what gentrification really means in the property context. It's not about new housing estates popping up on the outskirts. It's about the renewal of existing suburbs. So you'll start to see higher building approval ratios, and that's a big key to how I've done this research. We look at, which areas have got more buildings getting approved compared to the number of existing properties, and that's what the building approval ratio is. And that's because there's more knockdowns, more rebuilds, more infill projects, more major renovations showing up. People are drastically improving or developing property in an area. Other factors that indicate that we've got gentrification going on is a visible shift in the demographics. So higher incomes, more professionals, and better amenities that flow from that. We often see the old shopping strips getting revitalised, and perhaps most importantly, a growing sense of community pride in an area and a desirability to live there. So in short, gentrification happens when people start to believe in a suburb again and put their money where their mouth is. And in this episode, I've been using building approval data as a proxy for that physical transformation. And then I've filtered out areas that are dominated by new estates or any new land that's getting created. So I'm really after a transformation on existing established areas. And that's left us with a short list of those that are have got the true urban renewal stories going on within Perth at the moment. I've also taken a good look through the list and sort of combined that with my real world experience to, not just be about the data, but about what I'm physically seeing on the ground.
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
What if I told you Perth's biggest economic game changer isn't a new mine or a defence deal, but an airport? That's right. Perth Airport is gearing up for a $5 billion transformation that could create a city within a city, reshape our local economy and unlock property opportunities in suburbs like Redcliffe, Belmont, Cloverdale and High Wycombe. Today, I'm diving deep into what this expansion actually means for jobs, infrastructure, and most importantly, the WA property market. So buckle up, because this isn't just about planes taking off, it's about Perth's next economic takeoff. So, the newly released Perth Airport Master Plan for 2026, covered by Perth Now, lays out a massive $5 billion plan to build what they're calling One Airport, a fully integrated commercial, industrial and lifestyle hub that spreads across 2,100 hectares. We're talking about a new 3-kilometre parallel runway by 2028, brand new consolidated terminal at Airport Central by 2031, so that's combining the international and domestic, 2 multi-storey car parks and a 237-room hotel opening in 2027. And perhaps most interestingly, 5 distinct precincts, each blending aviation, logistics, retail, office and cultural uses. Essentially, the Perth Airport isn't just expanding, it's becoming an economic ecosystem, which is very exciting. Think of global benchmarks like Incheon in Seoul or Heathrow's Gateway Precinct in London. Perth's version could be our Southern Hemisphere answer, a true airport city. So let's take a bit of a look at the economic engine and what this is going to potentially mean for our state. What's the real payoff for WA? Currently, the Perth Airport supports 27,300 jobs and contributes $6.2 billion annually to WA's economy. By 2046, those numbers are forecasted to grow to 75,400 jobs and $17 billion worth of annual contribution. Now that's an impressive uplift and an impressive pipeline of job creation and overall contribution year in, year out to our economy. That's nearly tripling of the impact that the current airport has and about 175% increase in employment from a single project. And remember, this isn't just about tourism, this is about logistics, trade, FIFO workforces, e-commerce, fulfillment and international freight, all flowing through this precinct. So a massive hub of activity and economic contribution. For context, that's about as transformative to our service economy as the Pilbara was to mining exports in the 70s. Amazing. So now let's take a little bit of a look at the local ripple effects and the suburbs to watch. Let's bring this a bit closer to home, quite literally. Let's talk about the surrounding suburbs, Redcliffe, High Wycombe, Belmont and Cloverdale. Well, Redcliffe is going to be the crown jewel of this transformation. It's part of a 274-hectare Metronet East redevelopment area west of the airport, anchored by the Redcliffe train station. The draft Redcliffe Station Activity Centre plan calls for mixed-use zoning. Think mid-rise apartments, retail, cafes and walkable green corridors replacing the old Brearley Avenue. If that improvement scheme gets finalised, we could see serious value uplift for early movers in that area. High Wycombe is our next stop. In April 2025, the structure plan was approved, transitioning from light industrial to mixed use and residential zoning. So with the MetroNet East Precinct connecting directly to the airport, this suburb could see townhouse and apartment demand skyrocket over the next 5 years. So a lot of opportunity there as well. And then we look to Belmont and Cloverdale on the southwestern sort of side of the airport. There's no brand new rezoning yet, but the City of Belmont's Local Planning Scheme 15 already supports targeted infill and mixed-use projects, and these suburbs benefit from proximity to the airport, shopping centres and new road links. But investors need to check the future noise maps before jumping in to all these suburbs. So noise exposure will affect lending in the future, potentially valuations, or definitely valuations, prices, and future resale. So that is the biggest impact of these projects that you need to be aware of and consider if you're an existing property owner or you're looking to buy in the area. So let's go a bit deeper into this noise factor. Speaking of noise, that new parallel runway will redistribute flight paths, which means some areas will get quieter and others are potentially going to get much, much louder. WA's State Planning Policy 5.1 restricts sensitive uses like housing or schools within the 20 ANF contour. So whether you're buying or building, jump onto the Perth Airport Noise portal and check out that future overlay, because a beautiful property in the area could lose as much as 10% of its value if it's under a high impact flight path or more, and potentially even gain 10% go the other way if it's just outside that zone, but still walkable to transport and benefiting from all the amenities and overall demand that'll be generated to live in the area and live close to this employment and overall transport hub. So now let's zoom out a bit. Where does the Perth Airport expansion sit in the grand scheme of Australia's economic landscape and WA's economic landscape, more importantly? Let's see how it stacks up. So I brought to you an episode a few back on the AUKUS defence program. I was blown away by how transformative this is going to be to our state. Not only a couple of weeks later, I see this all come out about the airport. I mean, you'd have to think that the future's looking pretty bloody bright for Perth and the next 5 to 10 years just with these two projects anchoring things. I'm going into the high density planning changes that are going to reshape the areas within 800 metres of 10 train stations across Perth. I want to go into what this is going to mean for the people that own a property within that 800 metre radius. I'm going to look at how this might change the suburbs. Is it going to be a net positive overall benefit? What are some of the negatives? And how is this likely to shape out? So what's actually being proposed? The Cook government is creating 10 stations, or 10 station precincts rather, where the WA Planning Commission, not the local councils, are going to control zoning, building heights and densities within 800 metres of the station. The tools they'll use are improvement plans and improvement schemes, which are going to set the planning framework for each precinct, basically what can be built where and how tall, and it's going to shift the main decision-making power from the councils to the state, which is going to be through the WAPC, West Australian Planning Commission. Ultimately, they're aiming to streamline approvals and unlock more urban infill housing supply around the rail stations. And this is WA's version of the Transport Orientated Development, or TOD, push that we're seeing in New South Wales and Victoria, concentrating more medium and high density housing around the train stations and metro stations. So what stations are affected? There's 10 of them. I'll read them off. There's the Balladura, which is on the Morley to Allenbrook line, Bassendean, Carlisle/Oat Street, Claysbrook, Cottesloe, which is one of the contentious ones, Glendalough, Morley, Mosman Park, another contentious one, Redcliffe, and Swanbourne, which is rounding out the third contentious one. You might have picked up a trend there that each of those ones that are probably being fought the hardest are in the western suburbs, where there's a much stronger not in my backyard sort of NIMBY community that opposes density and has done a lot of times in the past, and it's made it very difficult for councils to move things through there. So the government's already flagged that more stations are likely to be added later. And ultimately, let's go into some of the key planning changes that are being proposed. What are the changes on the ground? Well, who's the boss? Before, it was the local councils that set the zoning and the height limits and then assessed most of the applications. After these changes, it would be the West Australian Planning Commission that writes the improvement scheme and then becomes the primary decision maker for development inside each of these precincts. Councils can still comment, but they no longer control the rules. So that's why some of the councils are very much up in arms about that. What can be built? We're expecting upzoning with more R codes, with mid-rise and high-rise apartments allowable, and a mixed use so apartments with shops below, especially very close to the stations. The exact heights and densities haven't been finalised yet, but the whole point is that higher density will be near the stations, which is what the ministers are openly selling it that way anyway. So where exactly is this going to be? I mentioned it was going to be within an 800-metre radius around each station. That's roughly a 10-minute walk. Both public and privately owned land are in scope, not just government-owned sites. So private residential as well. Now, how many homes might this create? The state is talking about it creating around 35,000 extra dwellings, potentially across the first 10 precincts over time. Now, what does the timeline look like for all of this? The announcement has just been made in November, with reforms to be rolled out next year, so from 2026 onwards. And realistically, it's going to happen in 3 stages. Over the short term, the next sort of 2026, 2027, planning and early development approvals will commence. So the improvement plans and schemes will be drafted, advertised, and then finalised. Early, well-capitalised developers will move quickly on obvious aggregation sites, so combining sites together and getting projects underway. There's not likely to be a flood of construction yet, but value expectations in these, especially in these precincts, are going to start shifting for those that are now sitting on a development site, which is where the exciting opportunity can lie. And over the medium term, from 2028 to 2032, there's likely to then be visible construction. So once the new controls are locked in and finance conditions cooperate, hopefully, you'll see mid-rise and high-rise projects underway, especially at Balladura, Morley, Redcliffe and Cottesloe, which have been flagged as the priorities by the government. Longer term, over 10 to 20 years, there'll potentially be that full build out of 35,000 odd new dwellings, and it could easily take a decade or more, as seen with similar precincts in Sydney and Melbourne. So it's not next year there'll be towers everywhere. It's a structural shift in how these suburbs will evolve over the next 10 to 20 years. Now, let's take a look at the likely impact on residential property. For land and houses that are inside that 800-metre ring, the biggest winners on paper are going to be the land owners in the rezoned areas. Properties there are going to become feasible development sites. So if they've got a good frontage, the larger lots, the corner positions, if they can be amalgamated with neighbours, you'll typically gain a land value uplift once the higher densities are allowed, and even before anything is built. So even just with the potential, as it gets closer, that'll start to become priced in with the potential. And I think early days, there's still going to be good value to be bought with potential upside in there. So experience from other cities shows that the upzoning often raises land prices for the development sites, and because you're selling more floor area potential per square metre of dirt. So for the existing house owners, the site value goes up in those precincts, but the detached house appeal may go down over time as the area becomes busier, more built up and noisier. So some of the negatives to start considering that'll happen over the next 5 or 10 years. So you get that developer premium, but you potentially get a lifestyle discount if you're going to remain living in there and you wanted a quiet suburban home. So for investors, the play is more about that future redevelopment value than it is about yield, because on a 1960s house that's got that going to be likely to be, you don't want to buy something with too much building component, especially if someone's just going to knock it down anyway. People will be wanting to pay for the property for its land value. So that usually means having a lower rental yield in the meantime, so you don't waste too much money on the building component. So lower rental yield's not for everyone, but can form a good part of an overall portfolio that's well designed.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.